Next, I'd like to invite Cormac Cullinan to the stand, please.
And I think rather than the stand, let's say invite them to speak with us. It just sounds like we're grilling them when we're not. And I meant to comment on the fact that we're in Banco Court not to be pretentious, but to bring the people into the legal system. In future, we'll be having people tribunals in town halls and under trees. But the one in Brisbane, it's fun to be here because we're reminding the legal system that we're watching it. Thank you.
Good morning, Cormac. Can I initially please ask your name, qualifications, and where you're from?
My name is Cormac Cullinan. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa. I practice as an environmental lawyer, so I'm an attorney by profession. But before I was a lawyer, I was an anti-apartheid activist, and I'm very involved in the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature.
Thank you, Cormac. So you've been a judge at international tribunals on the rights of nature before. Can you please tell us about these tribunals and their relevance to this tribunal?
And Cormac, can you lift your mic up a little? It's a bit dodgy. Yeah, I just want to be able to hear you.
Okay,
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Before I begin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge and honor the traditional custodians of the country on which we stand and their elders past, present, and future. And I was particularly enjoyed the dancing ceremony that we opened. I mean, I think it was a beautiful visual image of what we're dealing with the indigenous wisdom being expressed in the heart of the court system here in front of the paintings of the old judges. So I think that
that's how we planned it.
The symbolism was beautiful. I'd like to start by asking you to imagine how different the world would be if courts determined the lawfulness or otherwise of human conduct on the basis of whether or not it was in the interests of the whole community of life. If decisions were made by earth tribunals of respected and wise people, which drew on the wisdom of humanity as a whole, traditional wisdoms as well as scientific knowledge, etc., and which explicitly sought to respect the laws of nature and country, would that not be a vast improvement on what we have today? And this is really what the International Rights of Nature Tribunal is about, and I think this tribunal too. So to tell you a little bit of background about the International Tribunal, the story starts to some extent in April 2010 when a People's World Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth was convened in Cochabamba in Bolivia. And out of that conference, which was attended by some 32,000 people, we got the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which was an expression of fundamental rights, and particularly the duties of humanity to respect the rights of nature. And it is intended to be a companion piece to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, if you like, is a species-specific articulation of rights and duties. And out of that conference came a call for a global people's movement for Mother Earth. And in response to that call, one of the responses was the formation of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. And in early 2014, the Global Alliance was due to meet in Quito in Ecuador, and Alberto Acosta, one of the members, and also the former president of the Constitutional Assembly in Ecuador, which drafted the Constitution of Ecuador, which includes the rights of nature, suggested that we consider establishing a tribunal inspired by the Russell Tribunal, which was the International War Crimes Tribunal established in 1966 by the British philosopher Bertrand Russell and hosted by Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, as a way of bringing to public attention the ethical violations being committed in connection with the Vietnam War. And in a relatively short space of time, we established, set up the first hearing in Quito of the International Rights of Nature Tribunal. We subsequently have had meetings in Lima, in Paris, and in Bonn last year. And at the beginning, we were not terribly clear about the exact form of the tribunal. To some extent, it was seen as an event, as theater, an opportunity in which people and communities could come and tell their stories on a public forum, particularly before an international audience, and have their day in court, as it were, and which media could come to and listen to testimony not only from experts on the subjects, but also by affected people who could speak from the heart as to what it really feels like to be in a community where there's fracking, where your forests get cut down, where you get displaced by mining, etc. So the hearings were very, very powerful because they fed not only the intellect, but also the heart. And frequently people in the audience would end up in tears. But over time, we decided that what we needed to do is formalize this and make these tribunals real people's tribunals. So when we met in Paris, we formalized the establishment of the tribunal by the signing of a People's Convention, which was effectively the equivalent of an international treaty signed by governments, and we adopted statutes, etc. So in many ways, there are similarities with the 1979 Permanent People's Tribunal in the sense that we draw legitimacy from the will of the people internationally, but it has some important differences, particularly in relation to the law that applies. So the International Tribunal is established to deal with serious violations of the rights and duties established in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, and is entitled to apply not only international human rights law and the text of the declaration itself, but also to draw on indigenous wisdom and to apply the rights of nature, to apply natural law in the sense of the actual physical functioning of the planetary system as far as we can discern it. So why is this important? Firstly, it's establishing new norms of acceptable behavior. It's a norm establishing institution, which I think is very, very important. Secondly, I personally believe it's a very important prototype. Those of you who've heard me speak before over the last 2 days know that I'm fond of the quote from Buckminster Fuller, which says, "You never change things by fighting against the existing reality. To change something, build a model that makes the old model obsolete." And right here and now, this is an example of building a new model. We are establishing a prototype and using this prototype to develop our thinking, to improve our understanding of Earth jurisprudence, to show that the philosophies and ideas are capable of practical application, and most importantly, that the results that are produced are superior to the results that are produced by conventional court systems, if you can even access them. So the other very important aspect of this is that the tribunal has always applied a restorative justice approach rather than a punitive approach, as with many indigenous systems. So that means that the judgments not only identify who must be accountable for the violations, but they also say what must be done in order to restore the harm that is done. So in this way, the judgments of the tribunal establish an agenda for action. They say to the public, this is what we need to do to solve these problems. And it's also proved to be very powerful in relation to grassroots movements. To give an example, the last tribunal in Bonn decided to send a fact-finding mission to Bolivia to investigate the violations of building a road through indigenous territories and through rainforest. And initially, it was ignored by the Bolivian government, but public pressure, there was so much coverage of the fact-finding mission, particularly when they were detained by cocoa producers, cocaleros, that eventually the government had to meet with them, and it hugely strengthened indigenous movements in the country and generated a really strong, powerful force, and the judgment is yet to come. So I think that what we're talking about here, it's very important to realize that we're talking about a different kind of power. When we use the word power, we are very used to the idea of coercive power, the idea that a court is not a court unless you can send out the police and the sheriffs, etc., to enforce its judgments. But there's a different kind of power. In the introduction, Michelle referred to the power of people and country. And there's a huge power that comes when people agree, a power of consensus, a power of solidarity. And if we build the legitimacies of these courts to the point where the general public accepts that what's coming out of the courts, of these tribunals, is well-considered, well-analyzed judgments by respected people that they can trust, then we achieve a real kind of power, and people will themselves enforce it, in the sense that, for example, the judgment on the Great Barrier Reef called for divestment from the project. Now, I know the divestment campaigns that are happening that are not necessarily driven by that, but the fact of it is, I think we'll get to the point where you'll have effectively crowdfunding. You get the community as a whole will take it upon themselves to enforce the judgments. So I would like to conclude by saying, I think it's very, very important that we take ourselves very seriously, what we're doing here. And I would urge you to build the legitimacy of this tribunal, to build it in a way that it wins the hearts and minds and trust of the people, and in that way acquires a different kind of power. Because I believe very strongly that we are engaged in an incredibly important exercise. We are building the institutions right now of the ecological civilization that humanity will need if we are going to survive on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Corman. Does the panel have any questions, please?
I don't have a question, but I guess I just want to say, as a colleague who's been on the International Tribunal, it's really great to have you here and to confirm our connection to the international network of amazing people battling it out for social and ecological justice around the world. And Cormac and myself and a couple of others put together the Great Barrier Reef case, and it was heard in Ecuador at the first International Rights of Nature Tribunal, simply to tell the story of what was going on. And there's now a written judgment from that tribunal articulating some of the rights of the Great Barrier Reef. So it's a real privilege to have Cormac with us and to share his insights into our work here. So thank you, Cormac.